There's a quiet, ancient bond between humans and animals, a bond that's existed for centuries, built on trust, loyalty, and understanding. But what if that connection went deeper? What if, instead of merely understanding each other, a human and an animal could actually feel each other's emotions, share thoughts, and communicate without uttering a single word? Dear audience, before moving forward, I would like to say, your support means the world to us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, press the bell icon, and share this video with your friends to keep us motivated as we bring you valuable content. This is the story of an extraordinary bond between a young orphan and a horse, a connection so strong that it seems almost beyond the natural realm. It begins on a cold, gray morning in a small village nestled against the backdrop of vast, endless fields. The air is crisp with the early signs of winter, and the world around is wrapped in silence, save for the soft rustling of trees. A young orphan, barely in his teens, stands by the window of a small orphanage room. His eyes scan the horizon, tracing the movement of the wild horses that run freely through the open plains. He's known loss too much loss, and the life that he once knew seems like a distant memory. For him, the world has always been a place of quiet solitude. The laughter of others, the warmth of a family, are just distant echoes he's learned to live without. Yet, amidst this solitude, there's one thing that gives him a glimmer of hope, one thing that's always made him feel a little less alone: the horses. These creatures, strong and graceful, have always captured his attention. When he watches them, he doesn't see just animals running across the land. He sees freedom, strength, and the very kind of companionship he's yearned for. But, like most things in his life, that's just out of reach. Until one day, everything changes. It happens almost by accident. On an ordinary afternoon, when the sun has begun to dip behind the mountains and the sky is painted in shades of orange and pink, the young boy ventures outside. The orphanage's boundaries are safe but constricting, and his heart longs for something beyond them. He steps into the open, unaware that the world is about to offer him the most unlikely of gifts, a bond that could change his life forever. The horses are grazing near the edge of the meadow, but one in particular stands apart from the others. A dark, powerful creature, its coat a deep chestnut that seems to glow under the fading light. The boy doesn't know why, but there's something about this horse that draws him in. As he approaches slowly, the horse turns its head, locking eyes with him. In that moment, something unspoken passes between them, something so intense it takes his breath away. For the first time in his life, the boy feels as though he's being seen, not just looked at, but truly seen. And, in return, the horse seems to feel it too. As the boy approaches cautiously, he extends his hand, the distance between them growing smaller with each hesitant step. The horse doesn't retreat, but stands still, its gaze unwavering. Then, something incredible happens. As the boy reaches out to touch the horse's mane, a sensation floods his mind, an overwhelming surge of emotions. The horse isn't just standing there, it's reaching out to him too. A wave of peace, sadness, and longing floods his chest, filling him with an emotion so raw, it's almost too much to bear. But it isn't just the horse's emotions that the boy feels. No, it's something deeper, something beyond the simple connection between animal and human. He feels the horse's thoughts, a quiet murmur in the back of his mind, a whispered promise, a shared understanding, something he has never known before. They don't need words to communicate. The boy knows, in that moment, that they are connected in a way that defies explanation. Days pass, and with each encounter, their bond grows stronger. At first, the boy doesn't fully understand what's happening. It's as if the line between them is blurring, and they're no longer separate beings. Their emotions, their thoughts, flow into each other, melding into something beautiful and profound. The horse's presence is no longer just a comfort, it's a lifeline. And the boy, who has spent most of his life trying to survive, begins to feel something he's never known belonging. But there's a tension in the air, something unspoken, something lurking just beyond the edges of their connection. The villagers have always seen the horses as wild creatures, untamable, dangerous. And the boy, though he feels this deep bond, knows that the world outside the orphanage won't understand. How could they? They've never seen the way he and the horse can communicate, the way their emotions intertwine so seamlessly. It's something no one could believe unless they felt it themselves. The boy races to the stable, his heart pounding, unsure of what to do. The bond between them is so strong now, he can hardly breathe without feeling the horse's presence. And yet, as he approaches, something feels wrong. The horse is no longer standing near the barn. It's gone. In that moment, the boy is faced with an agonizing choice: risk everything to search for the horse, or stay and face the unknown forces that are slowly tearing apart the only family he's ever known. What happens next could alter the course of his life and their bond forever. The storm is coming, but the real question is, what will happen when it hits? The boy stood frozen in the stable, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps as he stared out into the distance. The sky had darkened, the swirling clouds turning a deep shade of gray, reflecting the storm that seemed to stir not just in the heavens above, but in the very core of his being. The horse had disappeared, vanishing into the vast plains beyond the village, leaving behind nothing but an unsettling silence. The connection he had felt with the animal, so powerful just hours earlier, now felt like a distant memory, slipping away with each passing second. His heart raced as 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind. Where had the horse gone? Why was it acting this way? The horse, so calm and steady, was now unpredictable, as if something had triggered a change in it, something the boy could not understand. The boy knew the horse was more than just an animal. It was his companion, his friend. He couldn't bear the thought of losing it now. Not after everything they had been through together. The bond they shared had become so strong, it was as though they were no longer separate beings. But now, that connection seemed to be unraveling, thread by thread, as if some invisible force was pulling them apart. He stepped out of the stable, squinting against the wind that had begun to pick up, sending dust and debris swirling through the air. The trees along the edge of the village swayed violently, their branches creaking under the force of the storm. The boy scanned the open fields, his eyes desperately searching for any sign of the horse. But the vast expanse of land stretched out before him, empty and silent, as though the world itself had gone still in anticipation of something. The boy's pulse quickened. He had to find the horse. He couldn't stand the thought of losing it. But what if it was too late? What if something had already happened? His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What if the horse was in danger? What if it had sensed something that he couldn't understand, something the villagers had been warning about for weeks? The village, nestled at the foot of the mountain, had always been a quiet place. The people were simple, their lives centered around farming, herding, and the land that had sustained them for generations. But recently, something had changed. The villagers, who had always lived in harmony with the natural world, had begun to speak of strange occurrences, disappearances, odd behaviors in the animals, and a growing sense of unease that seemed to permeate the very air. Some whispered about ancient legends, stories passed down through the generations about a bond between humans and animals that could not be controlled. Others spoke of dark forces stirring in the mountains, forces that had once been dormant but were now awakening. No one knew what to believe, but the fear was palpable. And the boy, though he hadn't fully understood it at first, could feel the weight of that fear pressing down on him. The boy took a deep breath and set his jaw, pushing the thoughts of the villagers and their superstitions aside. He couldn't let fear control him, not now. The connection he had with the horse was real, stronger than anything the villagers could believe. He could feel it in his chest, a quiet pulse that seemed to echo in time with his own heartbeat. The horse was out there, somewhere, and he would find it. He set off toward the fields, his feet pounding against the earth as he ran. The storm was now in full force, the wind howling as it whipped through the tall grasses, making it almost impossible to see. But the boy didn't care. He pushed on, his mind focused solely on the animal that had become his closest companion. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the unknown pressing on him, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. As he neared the edge of the fields, he stopped and scanned the horizon once more. There, just at the edge of his vision, he saw it movement. A dark shape, far off in the distance, just at the edge of the woods. His heart skipped a beat. It was the horse. He could feel it, the familiar pull of their connection drawing him toward it. Without thinking, he started toward it, his pace quickening as the shape grew larger and more distinct. He approached cautiously, his feet barely making a sound on the soft earth. As he drew nearer, the bond between them seemed to intensify, a wave of emotion washing over him, pulling him closer to the horse. But then, just as he reached out to touch its mane, a jolt of energy surged through his body, and the horse took a step back, its eyes flicking toward the woods. The boy froze. He could feel the horse's fear, its unease. It wasn't just the storm, it was something else, something far more dangerous. The boy's mind raced. What was the horse trying to tell him? What was it sensing that he couldn't see? Before he could react, a shadow moved in the distance, just at the edge of the trees. The horse snorted, its body tense, its ears pinned back against its head. The boy's heart pounded in his chest as he squinted into the darkening woods, trying to make out the shape. But the storm was closing in, the wind whipping around him, and the shadows seemed to shift, making it impossible to tell what was moving out there. The boy's pulse quickened. Was it a person? Or something else? He couldn't be sure, but something told him he wasn't alone anymore. The horse was reacting to something or someone that was out there in the woods, watching them. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving the shadows. The wind howled around him, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard something, a low, guttural sound, like an animal growling, coming from deep within the trees. It sent a chill down his spine. The horse was still on high alert, its body trembling with fear. The boy knew he had to act quickly, but what could he do? His heart pounded in his chest as he weighed his options. He couldn't leave the horse behind, not after everything they had been through. But the storm was growing worse, and the danger seemed to be closing in from all sides. He reached out again, this time more gently, his hand trembling as he touched the horse's mane. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of emotion flooded him. The horse's fear, its confusion, its deep sense of warning, it was all there, pouring into him, and he knew then that they were running out of time. Something was coming. Something that neither of them could escape. The boy looked back toward the village, but the lights were distant now, swallowed by the storm. There was no one coming to help them, not now. He had to make a decision. The bond between him and the horse was more than just a connection. It was a lifeline. And now he had to protect it, even if it meant venturing into the unknown, facing whatever danger lurked just beyond the trees. The boy drew a deep breath, steeling himself. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he couldn't turn back now. The storm had arrived, and with it, a darkness that would change everything. But what would happen when it did? Would the bond between him and the horse be enough to survive whatever was coming? Or would it be torn apart by forces far beyond their control? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: whatever happened next, it would test the very limits of their connection. And neither of them was ready for what was coming. The wind howled louder now, as if the earth itself were protesting the storm that had arrived. The boy stood frozen, his hands still on the horse's mane, but his heart was no longer focused solely on the creature in front of him. There was a growing sense of something darker just beyond the tree line. The feeling, heavy and oppressive, seemed to cling to him like a shadow. It wasn't just the wind or the storm that unsettled him. It was the presence of something unseen, lurking in the dark, waiting. The horse, too, seemed to sense the growing danger. Its body was taut, every muscle coiled, as if ready to bolt. The boy could feel the creature's heart racing through their connection, the panic almost overwhelming. And yet, there was something more, something deeper. The horse wasn't just afraid for itself. It was afraid for the boy, too. The bond they shared was no longer just one of companionship. It had become a shared sense of survival. They were in this together, bound by something neither of them could fully understand. As the boy's gaze flicked back to the shadowy trees, his mind raced. Who or what was out there? The whispers of the villagers echoed in his ears, and for the first time, the legends they'd spoken of seemed less like stories and more like warnings. The boy had always dismissed the superstitions of the village, thinking them nothing more than tales to frighten children. But now, standing in the darkening storm with the horse, he wasn't so sure. The villagers had spoken of an ancient force, one that lived deep within the mountains, a force that had long been dormant, but was said to awaken every few generations. They called it the Watcher, a creature of shadow and fear, a being that could twist the hearts of animals and humans alike. They said the Watcher could sense when bonds like the one the boy shared with the horse were formed, and it would seek to tear them apart, feeding on the fear and confusion that followed. The boy had always thought it was just an old myth, a story to explain the things that couldn't be understood. But now, as the wind howled and the air grew thick with tension, he wondered if the Watcher was real. And if it was coming for them. The horse shifted uneasily under his touch, its eyes wild with fear. The boy leaned closer, whispering softly, trying to calm it. But the horse, though still trusting, was clearly losing patience. It stamped its hooves, the sound echoing in the silence, and tossed its head back, as if trying to shake off the tension that clung to them both. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack like the sound of a branch snapping under the weight of something large, and the boy whipped his head around, his heart racing. The shadows in the trees had shifted. It was no longer just the wind. Something was moving in the woods. Something big. The boy's breath caught in his throat as a dark shape, almost indistinguishable from the shadows around it, stepped into view. He couldn't make out any details, but he knew it was there. He could feel it, just as the horse did. The connection between them flared, a rush of shared fear that made his legs tremble. The boy took a step back, his hand still gripping the horse's mane. He wanted to run, to get away from whatever was out there in the dark, but he couldn't leave the horse. Not like this. Not now. They were bound together, their fates intertwined, and whatever was coming, they would face it together. The shape in the trees moved again, slowly, almost deliberately. And then there was another sound, a low, rumbling growl, deep and resonant, like the sound of something far larger than anything the boy had ever known. The horse's body went rigid, its nostrils flaring as it drew in the scent of the air. The growl grew louder, echoing through the trees, vibrating in the boy's chest. It was so close now. The boy could feel the ground beneath his feet tremble. A sudden, sharp cry broke through the growl, high-pitched and frantic. The boy's heart skipped a beat as he realized the sound was not from the creature in the woods. It was from the village. Panic surged through him. The villagers were in danger. If the Watcher was real, then it wasn't just the boy and the horse it was after. It would be coming for them all. He couldn't let that happen. The boy glanced back toward the village, his mind torn between two choices. Should he stay with the horse, face whatever was out there, or race back to the village to warn the people? The storm was growing worse by the minute. If he didn't act soon, it might be too late. "Stay here," the boy whispered to the horse, his voice shaky but resolute. He didn't know if the animal understood, but he could feel it, an understanding between them. The horse nudged him gently, as if reassuring him, before stepping back, still on edge but trusting. The boy turned and sprinted toward the village, his feet slipping in the mud as the rain began to pour. He could feel the storm now, the sharp sting of the cold rain against his skin, the wind lashing at his face. The darkness seemed to close in on him, as the shadows from the trees stretched farther into the fields, creeping closer with each step. He could hear the growl still, low and threatening, but he pushed it from his mind. He had to warn the villagers. He had to make sure they were safe. As he neared the village, the scene that greeted him sent a chill through his bones. The lights from the homes were dimming, flickering in and out as if they were struggling against something unseen. The streets, usually so quiet, were now eerily still. There were no voices, no sounds of movement, only the distant cry of animals, frantic and confused. The boy's heart pounded in his chest as he raced through the empty streets, calling out for anyone who might be there. But there was no answer. He reached the center of the village, where the largest homes stood, only to find them all dark and silent. The heavy clouds above seemed to hang low, blocking out the stars and the moon, as if the world had gone to sleep. The only light was the faint glow of the last candle flickering in the window of an old woman's house. The boy knew she was the village elder, the one who had told him the stories about the Watcher. If anyone knew what was going on, it was her. He hammered on the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please, wake up," he shouted, his voice breaking. But there was no movement from inside. Frustrated, the boy grabbed the door handle and twisted it, only to find it unlocked. Cautiously, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the air thick with dust and the smell of something old. But there was no sign of the old woman. The only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. His pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. He needed to find her. He had to know what was happening, what was coming for them all. And, from the shadows, came a voice soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to freeze him in place. "Not all things are meant to be found, child." The boy turned, his heart leaping in his chest, only to find nothing but the still air, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. He wasn't alone anymore. The storm had followed him. The boy's breath caught in his throat as the voice echoed in the stillness of the room. He spun around, his heart hammering against his chest, but there was nothing. The house was empty. His senses screamed at him to leave, to run out into the storm, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The voice had been so real, so close, he could almost feel the words brushing against his skin. "Not all things are meant to be found, child." The words seemed to hang in the air, their meaning sinking in with a chilling weight. What had they meant? Who had spoken them? And why did they feel like a warning, one that came too late? The boy stepped back, his eyes darting around the dimly lit room, searching for any sign of the old woman. But there was nothing. The house, though abandoned, felt alive with an eerie energy, as if something unseen was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. Suddenly, the sound of shuffling feet echoed from the corner of the room. The boy froze, every muscle in his body tensed. The shadow in the corner shifted, and for a split second, the boy could swear he saw someone moving in the darkness. His hand shot out to the door, but before he could reach it, the sound of a low growl interrupted the silence. The boy's breath caught in his throat again. That sound, it was the same one he had heard in the woods. The growl, so deep, so menacing, it sent a jolt of fear straight to his core. He spun back around, eyes wide, scanning the room for the source of the noise. And then there was movement. A figure stepped into the faint light from the window, a figure he had not expected. It was the old woman, but she wasn't like he remembered. Her face was gaunt, pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, as though she had not blinked in years. Her once kind features were twisted with something darker now, something ancient. Her lips moved, but the words that came out were not her own. They were a rasping, guttural sound, like the growl of the beast in the woods. "Not all things are meant to be found," she repeated, her voice now strangely distorted. "Not all bonds are meant to survive." The boy's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the woman he had known. She wasn't herself. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but the fear was starting to take over. What was happening? Was she under some kind of spell? Or had the Watcher found her, too? Suddenly, the old woman's eyes flicked toward the door, her gaze locking with his, and something shifted in the room. It was as though the air thickened, the weight of something ancient and heavy pressing down on him from all sides. A deep, unnatural silence settled in the space, making every breath feel like an effort. The boy instinctively reached for the door handle, his hand trembling, but just as he touched it, a sharp screech pierced the air, sending a wave of nausea crashing through him. The old woman's body jerked violently, as if she were struggling against an invisible force. Her hands reached out, grasping for him, but she moved with such speed and unnatural grace that he could barely react. "Get out," she rasped, her voice now a low, guttural growl. "It's coming." The words were barely out of her mouth, before the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of it knocking him off balance. His body hit the floor with a thud, pain radiating through his back as he scrambled to regain his footing. The growl of the beast outside grew louder, more intense, as if it were closing in on him, getting closer with every passing second. He reached for the door handle again, this time desperately, his breath coming in short gasps. The house was shaking now, the walls creaking under the weight of something massive and terrifying pressing against them. He didn't know if it was the storm or something else, but the pressure was unbearable. And then, just as quickly as the shaking had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, the stillness suffocating. The boy's heartbeat was the only sound in the room now, loud and frantic. He could feel it in his chest, the thumping of his pulse echoing in his ears. He couldn't stay here, not with whatever that thing was coming closer. With one last effort, the boy threw his shoulder against the door, and this time it gave way. He stumbled into the dark hallway, his legs weak from the tension and fear that had built up inside him. The hallway stretched out before him like a tunnel, the shadows closing in around him as he moved toward the front door. But as he neared it, the air grew heavier and the temperature dropped, as if the very house itself was fighting him, trying to keep him trapped inside. The growl of the creature was deafening now, so close, so real. He could feel it vibrating in his bones, in his very blood. There was no escaping it. It was coming for him, for all of them. But how could he stop it? He had no answers, no plan. He was just a boy, standing in the middle of a storm, facing an ancient evil that was beyond his understanding. And then, as if the house itself had become a living thing, a figure appeared in the doorway, blocking his escape. The boy froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was tall, its body cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by a hood. But the boy could feel its eyes on him, cold and unblinking. This wasn't the old woman anymore. This was something else. The creature's voice, when it came, was a low, rasping whisper, like the sound of 1,000 voices speaking at once, twisted and unearthly. "You should not have come here," it said. "Now you are bound." The boy's heart skipped a beat as the weight of its words sank in. He had been drawn into something far bigger than he had ever imagined, something ancient and powerful. The bond between him and the horse, the very thing he had believed was his strength, had become the key to something far darker. His mind reeled, his thoughts spinning out of control. What did it mean to be bound? And how could he escape? He couldn't answer either of those questions, not yet. But he knew one thing for certain. The storm had only just begun, and whatever happened next, he would have to face it with the horse by his side. But the question lingered, unanswered. Would their bond be enough to withstand the power of the creature that was coming for them? Or would it be torn apart by forces far beyond their control? The boy didn't know. All he knew was that time was running out, and the darkness was closing in. The creature's cold, endless gaze never left the boy as it stepped forward, its movement slow, deliberate. Every step it took seemed to press the air down, heavier, suffocating, as though the space between them was shrinking with each heartbeat. The boy's chest tightened, and for a moment he thought he might collapse right there under the weight of whatever this thing was. It wasn't just a creature, it felt ancient, primal, like a force of nature itself. "You have no idea what you've become part of," the creature continued, its voice now a thick, suffocating rasp that seemed to crawl under the boy's skin. "The bond you share, it is not your own. You've been chosen." The boy's mind reeled. Chosen for what? He couldn't understand it. He had just wanted to survive, just wanted to find something, someone to hold on to in the chaos. And now, in this very house surrounded by shadows and looming terror, he was being told he had been chosen. The weight of it settled on him like a stone in his gut. His gaze flicked back toward the door, desperate for an escape. But as if reading his thoughts, the creature raised its hand, and with a mere gesture, the door slammed shut with an explosive force that rattled the walls. A low laugh echoed from the creature, as though it found the boy's efforts amusing. "Flee, if you like," it said, the words dripping with malice. "But you cannot run from what's inside of you. It has already begun." The boy's pulse surged. Inside of him? The thought made his blood run cold. What did that mean? What had he become a part of? His hand reached for the pocket where the talisman, the small token he had always kept close, hung. But it wasn't there. Panic surged in him, replacing the uncertainty. The talisman had been there when he had entered this cursed place. What had happened to it? His mind flashed to the old woman. Her warning had been clear, but the urgency in her voice had not fully sunk in. The Watcher. The creature that had been a myth, a story, a shadow of terror that loomed over the village for generations. The old woman had told him that the Watcher had the power to twist bonds, to warp them into something darker, something beyond understanding. Had he unknowingly walked into its trap? Was this bond between him and the horse the very thing the creature sought to control? And then the air shifted once more. The world tilted, the floor beneath his feet seeming to roll like the surface of an ocean, undulating with a pulse he could feel in his bones. The boy collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his mind scrambling to process what was happening. He felt the weight of something new pushing against him, something ancient, something that felt as if it had always been there, waiting for the moment to awaken. His eyes darted back to the figure before him. The creature's form was now fading, blending with the shadows, becoming less and less solid. For a moment, the boy wondered if it was some trick of his mind, a hallucination brought on by the fear and exhaustion. But the sensation in his chest, the growing pressure, the suffocating heat was all too real. The creature's voice grew fainter, its words now nearly a whisper. "I have awakened the bond, child. Your connection with the animal is no longer just yours. It is mine, and you will serve me." The room around the boy began to darken, the shadows lengthening and closing in. His thoughts were clouded, his mind swimming in a sea of confusion. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The feeling of something deep within him stirring, awakening, grew more intense. It was like a wild force was thrashing inside him, clawing to get out. His heart raced, his head pounded with the pressure of it all. And then, just as the darkness seemed to consume him, a flash of light broke through the faintest flicker of movement from the farthest corner of the room. It was the horse. At first, the boy thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The connection had been cut off, hadn't it? He had felt it break, the bond unraveling, pulling him away from the creature he had come to trust, to love. But there, in the corner, he could see the horse standing, its eyes wide and filled with an unspoken desperation. The boy blinked, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel the horse's panic, could feel it pushing through the space between them, breaking through the fog of confusion. For a brief, shining moment, the boy thought he could hear the horse's voice, distant and faint, but clear in its intent. "Help me." He staggered to his feet, the weight of the creature's presence pushing against him with every step. The boy's mind spun. The creature had claimed the bond, he could feel it, the darkness spreading from within him, crawling through his veins like ice, but the horse was still there. He could still sense it. The bond wasn't fully broken. There was still time. He reached out, his hand trembling, desperate for the strength of that bond to return. But as he did, the shadows twisted, blocking his path. The creature's laugh echoed in the dark, cold and cruel. "You think you can fight this, child? You think you can escape?" The boy's heart lurched. He had no choice. He had to escape. He had to save the horse, save himself. The creature's hold on him was growing stronger, more suffocating. But there was a spark, a flicker of hope. The horse was still there. It was still connected to him. With a final surge of strength, the boy broke through the veil of darkness, pushing toward the light of the window where the horse stood. But as he reached out for it, the room exploded with sound, the growl of the creature, the thunder of the storm outside, and the deafening, unrelenting scream of the horse. It was a cry of pain, of fury, of something far worse than anything the boy had ever known. The shadows rose around him in a whirl of motion, consuming everything in their path, and the boy realized, with a heart-stopping clarity, that the battle had only just begun. The stakes had never been higher, and he was running out of time. The boy's body was trembling with exhaustion, his breath ragged in his chest, but he kept moving toward the horse, the only thing that anchored him to the reality he knew. The darkness swirled around him like a living thing, pulling at his mind, drowning him in fear. The growl of the creature grew louder, and the shadows stretched toward him like claws, desperate to drag him back into the depths of the unknown. But as his hand reached out, fingers brushing against the cold, damp wood of the window frame, a surge of energy shot through him, sharp, bright, and blinding. His mind cleared, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he understood. It wasn't the creature that held the power over him. It wasn't the watcher. The power, the true power, had always been within him. The bond between him and the horse wasn't something imposed from the outside. It was something that had been growing within him, waiting to be awakened. The creature had manipulated him, had tried to break him, but the connection to the horse had never truly been severed. It had only been waiting for the right moment to manifest, to rise up and break free. The boy closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of his own heartbeat, the steady pulse that matched the horse's own. He could feel it now, that deep connection, stronger than ever. He wasn't alone. The horse was still there, waiting for him to take control. With a deep breath, the boy reached into the very core of himself, pulling from that bond. He could feel the horse's presence surge through him, a tidal wave of power that pushed back against the creature's hold. The darkness recoiled, twisting and snapping as if it were afraid, struggling to maintain its grip. But it was too late. The boy had found his strength. The bond was his, and he was no longer just a passenger in his own story. The shadows shrieked in fury, the growl of the creature rising to a deafening crescendo. But it was not enough. With every ounce of strength, the boy and the horse pushed back together, their minds linked, their wills intertwined. The creature's form began to dissolve, its power fading like mist under the first rays of dawn. It screeched in agony, a sound so terrible that it rattled the very walls of the house. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished. The room fell silent. The oppressive weight that had hung over them lifted, and the air seemed to lighten. The boy blinked, disoriented, as the darkness slowly receded, leaving only the faint glow of the storm's fading light streaming through the window. But even as the silence settled in, something felt wrong. The boy's heart continued to race, his body still vibrating with the remnants of the power that had surged through him. He turned toward the horse, who was now standing calm, its eyes reflecting the same confusion, the same unspoken fear. They had won, yes. But there was still something else, a feeling of uncertainty, of something left unresolved. And then it hit him. The connection between him and the horse had shifted. It wasn't just a bond of understanding, of shared emotions. It was something deeper now, something more profound. The boy could feel the horse's every thought, every flicker of its mind. He could sense its confusion, its hesitation. And there, just beneath the surface, was an undeniable truth. The boy took a step back, his heart pounding as the realization settled in. The horse had not just been a companion. The horse had been the key. The bond between them had been created for a reason, but the reason was not just to survive the darkness. It was something much larger, something tied to the boy's own fate. The storm outside roared to life once again, thunder cracking the sky, the wind howling against the walls of the house. The boy's gaze locked with the horse's, and for the first time, he saw something in its eyes, a spark of recognition, a flicker of something ancient. The creature they had just defeated had been only a part of the greater whole. The real test was still to come. A sharp, cold wind swept through the room, and the boy's breath caught in his throat. He felt the temperature drop, the shadows stirring once more, but this time they were different. They were not just the remnants of the creature. They were something else, something older, something more powerful. Suddenly, the boy's mind was flooded with images, flashes of places he had never been, faces he didn't recognize, and a vision of a vast, endless horizon stretching before him, a path that led into the unknown. It was the same vision the horse had shared with him, the same feeling of something waiting just beyond their reach. But now, the boy understood. They weren't just being hunted. They were being called. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, broke through the storm. It wasn't the creature. It wasn't the old woman. It was something else, something far more ancient. The voice spoke in a language the boy didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The bond has been forged. The path has been chosen. Now you must walk it. The boy's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. With a sudden clarity, the boy stepped forward, his hand reaching for the horse's mane. He could feel the warmth of its body, the steady rhythm of its breath, and the bond between them was no longer just a link. It was a tether to something much bigger, something far more dangerous than the creature they had just faced. The horse lowered its head, nudging him gently, as if to remind him that they were in this together, no matter what came next. The boy's grip tightened on its mane, and for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose, a deep knowing that whatever they faced next, they would face it as one. But before he could take another step, the ground beneath them shook. The storm outside intensified, the sky flashing with violent bursts of lightning. And through the chaos, the boy heard the sound he had been dreading, the sound of the Watcher's voice, louder than ever before. You cannot escape the path, child. It is already too late. And in that moment, the boy understood. The bond, the power, the connection, it had never been just about survival. It had never been about escaping the darkness. The boy and the horse were not running from something. They were running toward it. And what awaited them at the end of the path was something far worse, far more terrifying than they could ever have imagined. But there was no turning back now. The final twist had been revealed. As the ground trembled beneath them, the boy and the horse stood still, the storm around them growing more intense by the second. The wind howled, and the trees outside bent under the force of the gales. But still, the boy couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. The weight of the Watcher's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that whatever lay ahead could be far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. But as he stood there, with the horse by his side, the boy's fear began to ebb, replaced by a quiet determination. The bond between him and the horse wasn't just a curse. It was a gift. A gift that had given him the strength to face the darkness, to survive the creature's relentless pursuit. And now, as the storm outside raged on, he realized that the true power wasn't in running away from the dangers that lay ahead, but in facing them head-on. The horse shifted beneath him, its powerful muscles tensing, as if it too could feel the shift in the air. It was ready. And so was the boy. They turned toward the darkened hallway, where shadows still seemed to gather, but this time they didn't seem quite as threatening. The boy's mind was clearer now, his connection with the horse stronger than ever. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. They would face whatever lay beyond that door, whatever the Watcher had planned, and they would emerge victorious. But as they stepped forward, a new voice rang out, soft, gentle, but unmistakable. It was the voice of the old woman, the one who had warned him about the Watcher. "Child, listen," she said, her voice carrying across the stillness of the house. "The path you walk is one of choice. You do not have to face this alone. The bond you share with the horse is a powerful thing, but you are more than just the sum of that bond. You have the power to change your fate. Don't let the darkness control you." The boy froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never truly understood the old woman's words, had thought they were just warnings, nothing more. But now, as he stood at the edge of the unknown, he realized she had been trying to tell him something deeper. He wasn't just a vessel for the power of the horse. He was the one who held the key. The bond, while powerful, was just one part of the equation. The true strength came from within him. With this new understanding, the boy took another step forward, his gaze steady, his mind clear. He could feel the weight of the storm still raging outside, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like the winds of change, guiding him towards something greater. The hallway before him seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows now taking on new shapes, as though they were trying to whisper their secrets to him. But the boy wasn't afraid anymore. He had the horse. He had his own inner strength. And together, they were unstoppable. They moved deeper into the house, the air growing colder with each step, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. The boy's heart beat in time with the horse's, and he could sense the creature's own curiosity, its instinct for survival, for protection. They were both searching for the same thing and answer. At the end of the hallway, they reached a door, old, weathered, and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The boy hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the choice before him. He could turn back, escape into the safety of the world outside. But something inside him told him that if he did, he would never truly be free. The darkness would always follow him, always be there, lurking just out of sight. He glanced down at the horse, its eyes wide, waiting for his decision. The bond between them was undeniable. They were partners now, not just in survival, but in everything. And with that understanding came the quiet strength to face whatever was behind that door. With a deep breath, the boy pushed it open. Beyond the door lay a vast, empty room, its stone walls covered in ancient symbols, its floor polished to a shine. The air inside was thick with the weight of time, the feeling of something ancient and powerful lingering just out of reach. The room felt alive, as if it were watching them, waiting. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the Watcher. The creature was no longer the twisted, monstrous figure it had once been. Instead, it stood tall, regal, and strangely calm, its eyes locking onto the boy with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The shadows that had clung to it before now seemed to fade into the background, as if they were no longer necessary. "You've come," the Watcher said, its voice smooth and cold, like the edge of a blade. "I knew you would. You've always been a part of this. The bond, the path you were always meant to walk it." The boy's stomach churned, but he stood firm. The Watcher's words no longer held the same power over him. He could feel the strength of the horse, the strength within himself. He wasn't just a pawn in some game of fate. He was the one who could decide what came next. "You're wrong," the boy said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I've never been part of your plan. This bond, it's not a curse. It's a gift. A gift that's shown me the truth. You've tried to control me, but you can't. This ends now." The Watcher's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark passing through them. "You think you can defy me? You think you can break the path that's been set for you?" The boy shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "No, I'm not breaking anything. I'm choosing it. I choose to walk my own path. And I choose to do it with my friend, my partner." The horse, standing beside him, let out a soft whinny, its body tense with anticipation. The bond between them thrummed with energy, each heartbeat a testament to the strength they had found together. They were ready. For a moment, the Watcher seemed to hesitate, its gaze flicking between the boy and the horse, as if weighing its options. Then, with a sigh, it spoke again, its voice tinged with a strange sadness. "You were always meant for greatness," it said, its tone almost gentle. "But greatness comes at a cost. You will never truly be free, not completely. There will always be something else, something waiting. The boy felt the weight of the Watcher's words, but they no longer held the power to frighten him. He had faced the darkness, faced the creature, and had found his way through. He had found his own strength, and it wasn't something the Watcher could take from him. I don't need to be free of everything, the boy said, his voice firm. I just need to be free of you. With those words, the room seemed to shift. The shadows that had once been so oppressive began to dissipate, the air clearing. The Watcher let out a long, low hiss, its form flickering as if it were struggling to hold itself together. But it was too late. The bond had been broken. The boy and the horse had won. The creature's form began to crumble, its power fading away as the boy stepped forward, the horse at his side. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. The darkness had been banished, and the path ahead was theirs to walk. As the Watcher dissolved into nothingness, the storm outside began to subside, the winds calming, the clouds breaking apart to reveal a sky filled with stars. Boy looked up, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had brought him to this moment. It had been a long, hard journey, but he had made it. And he wasn't alone. Together, with the horse by his side, they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. And as they stood in the quiet aftermath, there would always be challenges, always be new paths to follow. But he was ready. He had the strength, the courage, and the bond that would carry him through anything that came next. And so, with the horse beside him, the boy walked forward, into the unknown, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. And that was all he needed.